Hey, Darce, what's happening, man? It's good to see you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, brother. It's been a while, so it's good to get reconnected.
Yes, let's jump right into this. Let give everybody the backstory of where in the world Darce has been. I mean, you've lived a great career so far and continue to do great things. So let's share the origin story before we have some fun and jump into some really cool topics out on the front of our minds lately.
All right, I'll try and make it quick. Born and raised in a little town, Grand Prairie, Alberta. Ski racing was my sport. Ended up in college. That's how I got in the States. By trade and training, physical therapist, athletic trainer, strength and conditioning coach. Had a PT practice after PT school, then went to Athletes Performance, now known Exos. And then from there, that opened my world to sports performance, rehab, all things sports, I guess. And got the opportunity. The mountains were calling my name, so we moved back to Tahoe, which is where I'm currently at, hence this sloped roof you're seeing. And then got my first opportunity in professional soccer with a club, FC Bayern Munich, as a rehab performance coach. And then gosh, after that, came back, got back with Exos, was working with Adidas, doing it in the My Coach world. It was a technology space that Adidas was playing in, and then working with the German national team. So spent two World Cups with them, one for that little sucker back there, and one in 2018, which didn't go near as good as that one back there. And from there, was also head of performance at AS Roma. Came back to the States in 2018, joined a company called Kitman Labs, a performance intelligence system, because data has exploded, as we all know, and trying to wrangle that. And then also got the opportunity to join the U.S. men's national team as performance coach. And after the last cycle of the World Cup 22, and now the head of performance for them going into World Cup 2026. So super excited, which is going to be in the U.S. So I don't think the U.S. knows what's coming as far as World Cup soccer. So super excited to be a part of that piece of history.
I am so excited for the World Cup to come. It is like I'm already looking at where in the country do I rent an Airbnb for a month and just travel to the different arenas and stadiums that are hosting because it's going to be exciting. And for those that Darsh just breezed over an amazing career, what he was pointing to in the back right there was a beautiful World Cup trophy that he won with Germany back in 2006 or 2010?
14.
Geez, well, my way off there. Okay, 2014. So he is pointing to a World Cup title that he won in 2014. So super envious that you get to point to that and just casually drop that on a podcast.
It's a mini me, right? It's the smaller version, kind of a little memento.
Well, that's amazing. So listen, let's just briefly scratch the surface here because you've from starting it as a PT, AT, S&C at formerly Athletes Performance, now Exos, to that fantastic career up through all the elite sports, international, domestic soccer, to now working in the data optimization space. One question I'm really keen to kind of ask you is, how has the approach to health and performance evolved across your career?
Wow, that's a good question. We could take that a lot of different ways. Man, I would say like data obviously is a big part of it. I think people are becoming more aware. I don't know if people have been around a little while. So back in the day when we were all too fat, it was like take fat out of food. And then we're realizing like fat's a good thing. Good fat's a good thing. And I think we're learning all the bad decisions we made back then to try and, get people fitter and better, less fat and more fit. And, it's really getting to a more holistic, organic place. And, data is a big part of that. We've got a lot better science, research, understanding, awareness of it all. And so, yeah, I think it's, eat clean, eat often, your one big chemical reaction. So kind of like a top fuel car, what you put in is what you get out. And, when you're young, you can burn the crappy fuels a little better and your car gets away with it. As you get older, you don't have as much room to move because your engine's been put through the mileage a little bit.
Perfect. That's wonderful. I think it speaks. I think it speaks to what you've experienced both physically and professionally throughout your career. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but you were quite active throughout your career as far as lifestyle? As far as, did you compete in anything as biking as well?
Yeah, so ski racing was my sport growing up. That's what it got me down in the States in college. Then trying to still stay competitive, I took up mountain racing. And so I did that, just kind of, not pro by any stretch. But was, doing the weekend races in the age group categories. Then went from there, got really into endurance. I forgot I also worked for a pro cycling team for 5 years. So got really head deep into the performance metabolic space, those guys. And so went from mountain biking to off-road triathlon to regular triathlon to marathons. And so just trying to stay moving and, lifting and kind of practice what I preach, I guess.
I mean, you definitely are. I mean, I don't think many people your age can say they've done that much physical activity at a high level competing. So I envy that. And hopefully, in 20 years' time, I'm doing the same thing as you are. So
I appreciate it.
we all
I
have
figure
goals,
if
right?
I could do it for another 30, I might win a trophy for myself. Because I'll be the only guy in my age group going at it.
I guess last one standing is the mentality there.
Yeah, exactly.
But before we hit record on this episode, I'd asked you a question. It's like, hey, what's been on the front of your mind lately? And a couple weeks ago, we had talked about this too when we were talking about integration of Kitman Labs and where the space of data optimization is going. And the phrase you just used before we started this was language limiting the pathway. And referencing to the traditional model in the sports rehabilitation space of using phases and progressions that are cut and dry when it comes to bringing an athlete back from injury or returning an athlete to play following an injury. So I wanted to double click on that expression of language limiting pathway. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, there was a good book. Before I got married, my wife and I stumbled across it. We actually went to one of the classes that the author said and or was putting on, and it was called Tongue Fu, words to use and words to lose. Because language is important, and there's a bunch of great books that kind of talk about the history of language, and language puts labels on things, and based on the label, the interpretation of the label, that changes the perception for who it is reading that label. And I think those are critical pieces. And early in the career, I would always hear Mark Verstegen saying, hey, we can upgrade this. And I read in this book, it's like, hey, nobody wants to change, because change implies that what you're doing is wrong, but everybody wants an upgrade. Like, hey, if I can upgrade that, yeah, I'll take the upgrade. But if you need to change this, it's like, well, what do you mean change? Like, what I'm doing is good. Why do I need to change it? So just little things like that. And as it relates to rehab, one thing I'm experiencing, and partly my daughter is kind of making her journey into professional athletics and is currently on the U.S. snowboard team and going through some injuries and kind of seeing the doctors. They talk about like stage 1, X amount of time. And, the goal is range of motion. And so that becomes the focus. It was interesting to just watch her interpret this. And then stage 2, it's, regain strength and they have criteria, but I think the criteria based bit needs to be put on the top line. And if that takes a week, it takes a week. If it takes 3 weeks, it takes 3 weeks. Because, they have to demonstrate some competency to move on to the next level. And so what I'm seeing is that it really got her focused on what that criteria piece was, but it made her lose sight that there's 99% of her body that is still totally fine, that she can work on and do stuff with to progress everything forward. So I almost feel like our language needs to turn into this like concurrent pathway program, right? Like an equalizer board where you have your training components, and based on where you're at, your range of motion will dictate what you could do from a strength bit, but you can still push those levers. And as that range of motion improves and all these, doorways and levers open up to keep moving forward, but it puts the onus more on the athlete and gives the athlete more control in what their outcome is, rather than relying on a PT or someone like me to be like, okay, we got to get your range of motion. Yes, I'll help facilitate that, but there's so much more they can do to make that happen. That's one big example where I think, using language is a critical part to how people take in what they can't do, and their mentality and mindset moving forward on having some control of their own circumstance.
One expression that comes to mind as you're describing, okay, you have the criteria, you have the stages, you have the phases. All of that is to try and guide people towards achieving a goal. But one phrase I've come to adopt in my career is just like respecting biology, because sometimes I do think we overinvest in the criteria and forget that, hey, at a biological level, tissue's still healing. So within this concept of language limiting or language facilitating, how do you integrate the biology component to it in addition to the criteria? Because those are the two models and two levers we're pulling on. It's you have your criteria, but early on in an injury or early on in a rehab case, surgical case, you're fighting biology at the same time. How do you integrate or balance the dynamics between biology versus criteria?
Yeah, I would say criteria is more of a function of I can demonstrate success. And they kind of go hand in hand, right? Like, so say if you have an ACL and you got to give it, that 6 weeks to 3 months for everything to really heal in well, then it's like, hey, the criteria to move forward is you got to be able to single leg squat well. You got to be able to balance, stabilize, move through all these bits before you get there. And I would say typically, it's not just at 3 months, okay, the biology says you're good, now you can go run amok. You still have to demonstrate some competencies in those criteria-based progressions that are limiting your ability to move forward. Like there was a good book, the Checklist Manifesto, right? And they talked about really catastrophic industries like the airline industry, the mining industry, nuclear power. Like when there's a problem, it's catastrophic and a lot of people die. So what do they do to put measures in place to make sure things happen? And that's, checklists. And it's not that you have to do everything on the checklist, but you at least have to acknowledge like, hey, here's a thing. Am I doing this? Yes, no, why not? And move forward. So I'm having a conscious decision, and that's how they mitigate problems. And I think, also you touched a little bit about it on the data side. The one thing with this data explosion that we've had is we've kind of lost sight of good progressions. Because as we were also talking about, back in the day, you had your goniometer, your dynamometer, your stopwatch, your sets and reps, your tape measure, and your I might have said stopwatch already, like 5 or 6 things, which, were great because it was only 5 or 6 things that were really basic, that were demonstrating measurable improvement. From there, I guess you're doing heart rate probably, right? And from there, it was like, okay, what progression makes sense? Like you can do this. Okay, the next step is to move to this. And then it's, your sets, reps, volume is your data that you're showing progression, right? And then the quality of the activity that you're doing. And now we've got so much data that I think people are kind of like, oh, the criteria, the force dex says you have to be at X newtons to move forward. Okay, like my Nordic is, 400 newtons. But I turn around and when they say I'm back, I re-tear my hamstring. Like it's not like just because it's that number or a few other numbers doesn't mean that you're good to go. Like you still got to demonstrate competency in movement, patterns and abilities to get through. And the data there is just giving you informed input to say, yep, I'm what I'm seeing is all matching out and it's in a good spot. Because I would say that was the piece we were missing, was like, yeah, I think everything looks good, so I'm going to move forward and go forward. Now you can say, you're just that much more confident that, yep, it all is good, and we're gonna move to the next thing.
Would you agree with this statement? The data should be a not a support, but a confidence check in what you're seeing, or it should be almost a checklist against what you already believe and think based on the criteria in front of you. Because, and the reason let me back up here. The reason I'm asking this statement, if you agree or disagree, is because my experience when you talk about all the data and the influx in data, like you alluded to, if you have the good progressions and you have the good plan and you understand the global plan in addition to the minutia of that day, then the data is probably already confirming or denying what you're already seeing. And so you just kind of go back into the data and say, okay, yeah, I saw this today. Does the data say the same thing? Great, stick with the plan. If not, am I going against the data? Okay, maybe I have to pivot. But more often than not, I have found that if I'm critically thinking and if I am logically progressing in a reasonable manner, the data just falls in line with it. And it's not necessarily the data is driving the decision. Like you said, it's informing the decision and informing the process. So I want to back up to my original statement and ask, do you agree or disagree that data should not be leading the decision, but it should be guiding if you're pivoting from left to right?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say guiding, like it's a plus one, right? Like it's just added information. So to your point, like they could be looking good, but your force numbers are lower than you would like. Okay, we're just going to keep on this path for another week. We're going to, go here and give a little more, adaptation to before we really add on another layer. But from a progression standpoint, they're looking good, moving good, and it all adds in. And I think, if you go back to the old school stuff where like on the table, you check somebody's range of motion and all their range of motion is within normal limits, and then you stand them up, you think like, okay, you're hypothesizing, I'm going to stand you up, you're going to do a squat and you're going to look amazing because you have all the requisite range of motion. They stand up, they can't squat, and you're like, wow, that's weird. Like you have all the abilities, so what's the problem? Like it's a software problem. So you got to coach them better in the movement because they have the requisite ability, but they don't have maybe the software to program it into a moving activity. And so the data just gives you information to make that 1+1 be 2, and you feel really good about it. So yeah, I would say it's just an add-on. I wouldn't, yeah, because I also wouldn't say, and to the point of language, when you say guide your decision making, like if somebody's 500 newtons and that's a good number, but they're, still not moving with great quality, like, you know what, I'm going to focus on the quality a little bit, even though you're producing the number, because I know what the long-term ramifications, now they're an overcharged engine with not a great movement pattern, which is also not good. So it goes like it's just another piece of information to help you have a better to reduce the risk of your next decision, essentially.
I'm really curious on your perspective on this question. We've been talking about data. We've been going back and forth on like the art of coaching and being a therapist, and then the science of data and technology. And I'm just really curious the space that you're living in at Kitman Labs, and we'll dive deeper in kind of some of the data optimization that you're doing there and what you've been doing in the soccer space. But are we going to get to a space where data, technology, algorithms are going to replace that decision making of the clinician?
Yeah, it'll never replace it. And it's kind of like, here's a good example, right? Like your phone. How many phone numbers do you remember today? Like if I said, hey,
I still remember the same phone numbers before I had a cell phone. Those are the numbers that I still remember.
Right. And so, right, like, you don't remember it because you don't have to. So I think one of the things that technology is going to do is it's going to probably make people think a little less as to the why, and we'll just become goats like, oh, it says to go here, so I went there, and you kind of lose that critical thinking. So I think that's going to be the challenge. With the same time, it'll give you information that you might not have otherwise thought about, right? That you'd be like, oh yeah, check this, check that. Because currently, or how I was taught from an evaluation standpoint, regardless if you came in with a shoulder or a knee, I'm going to do the exact same neural exam on you and the exact same orthopedic exam to make sure that I don't miss any little thing that could be contributing to an overall bigger problem. Like, for example, I had one person that came in and it was for a cuboid manip in their foot. I went through a neural exam. They had fatigable, weakness in their L5, L4. And so it was a back problem. The cuboid was the output to the back problem. And until we fixed the back problem, the cuboid problem was going to continue to be a problem. And so I think in that space, we're going to get a little lazy, and we need to be conscious of that we don't, that we're still thinking critically about everything, because it'll allow us to do a lot more and be a lot more efficient with our time, get through things and understand things a little quicker. But we still need to know the why as we're making the decisions.
How would if you were a young practicing clinician and you were trying to manage the data and tech to improve your efficiency and understanding of what you're seeing, but also man your ability to critically think, how would you manage that?
Start simple, right? Like, what are the things that you're actually trying to answer, and because it's really easy to add more and then you kind of lose the forest through the trees. So get your process, get your protocols, get all that stuff totally dialed as you can. Then start adding layers of, okay, how can I measure this to confirm what I'm seeing? And, like another example, I'll get people say, "Hey, Darce, what should we be testing? What should we measure?" And to me, it's like, well, it depends. What are you doing? Like, what's your work? What's the, what are your protocols or procedures? And then you find the things that you can measure easily and in situ to keep you moving forward. But you don't want to start with, oh, here's the 10 things I can measure, so therefore that's going to be my program. I'm going to build my program first and then find things that'll help me determine if I'm doing a good program or not.
It's funny you say that. I just had that conversation with a friend out here in Arizona, and they're looking to build a gym inside a soccer training facility. And he just starts going off on like all this tech that I want to bring in. He's like, "How? Like, what kind of equipment and tech should we get?" And I said, "Whoa. Let's pump the brakes. Like, what's your intention and goal with this gym? Like, what's the program design? Like, how do you want these kids and these teams to improve their performance? Like, what's meaningful to you?" He's like, oh, he starts thinking about it. And I said, go get the KPIs and the tech that support that, not go get the new sexy tech that your algorithm on Instagram is feeding you, right? Because ultimately, like, the environment has to shape. The environment's going to dictate what you can and cannot accomplish. And so if you're starting with just the hardware, but you don't have the software, then eventually your software is not going to be as optimal as it could be because you don't have necessary hardware. So anyway, I share that same perspective in the sense that you got to understand what your intentions are, and almost like what's your why, not to go Simon Sinek on us here, but understand like what's the why and the purpose behind what we're trying to do, and then build around that. So then we can hopefully create something that's more efficient and repeatable and measurable over time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a critical piece because at the end of the day, like, people were successful before we had data, right? Like, and we have to remember that. And things are moving forward. People performances, right? Like, you got the onset of CrossFit now that's exposing in a good way, like, how fit somebody can be. Like, they can squat a house and still run a 5-minute mile, where back in the day it was one or the other. You can't have two. You can't have two masters. And so, like, as a human race, we're getting better. Like the combine this year with the new 40 time, like, athletes are getting better because they're training younger, they're getting all this stuff. But like, at the end of the day, we were successful before all this information. And it's just, how do we use it to our advantage to facilitate even getting better and not getting lost and lost in the trees with it.
1,000% agree. I totally agree with that statement. Coming from someone that's lived that too, like, right, like, you're someone that I've, and I mean that respectfully, like, right, you lived in a space before we had all the tech and data, and you are like in a completely like 360 space. You're working for a company in Kitman Labs that's trying to do the exact opposite. Like, how do we incorporate all these data streams and technology and data and algorithms and advancements in AI and machine learning to optimize performance, improve outcomes for the better sake of humans in general. So let's just jump into that, because I know we've been kind of skirting around on this topic in question around data optimization and the work that you're doing there, or the work that you're a part of within that company, right? I don't want to give you all the credit. Like, let's give Steve a lot of credit.
Nor should I have it. Yeah, exactly.
But for those that are unfamiliar, I think what we probably have to do is really set the foundation, because unless you've worked in high performance in sport, a lot of the terminology that we may start jumping into may be foreign to folks. So let's start with, earlier in the conversation, you talked about my coach, and that's a whole other can of worms that we can jump into. But I think what we should probably lay the groundwork for is, like, when we say athlete management system, which Kitman provides, and we talk about data streams and we talk about integration, data optimization, I feel like those are words and phrases that we're going to talk about here. So let's break each one of those down to just lay the groundwork. So the first one, let's start with, is athlete management system. Like, what is that and why is it important?
Yeah, so athlete management system was a term from the 80s, right? 80s, well, maybe not 80s, 90s, I would say 2000s, where you were collecting data on athletes. So it just was an athlete management system, right? Like, you have this data you would get from GPS, like the devices that guys wear in games and gals. That was the big data bit, right? Like, it was injuries, and then GPS was the one where it was really started producing a lot of information. And we only had Excel at the time. And so you figured it out, and you got your tables and your formulas, your lookup tables. And then from there, we went to, Microsoft Access, because the data started becoming bigger and you needed, a little more room to move. And so where we've gotten to, and this is where Kitman's gotten to, is it's beyond an athlete management system these days. It's an intelligence platform, because you're taking data across everything from nutrition to strength and conditioning to metabolics to injuries. And it's all going into one place. So you have a single snapshot of where anybody is, coaching and development, like even training data. And so then from there, you can start to run real-time analytics and analysis on the information, to where, there's kind of three levels. There's descriptive information, right? Like, this is how much I ran today. This is how much I lifted today. This is what I did today. Then there's predictive data, right? Like, based on my historical information, if we do this, I can predict that we will do this again, or we'll do 10% more, 20% more. And then from there, that's prescriptive data. Then you get into the predictive data, where, based on all your injuries, the weight you're lifting, GPS, all this stuff, I can predict, if we go down this path, that there's a 30% higher chance that you're going to get injured. And that's the realm that we're moving into now, because, of what we're able to do. But it takes, and this is what people are starting to, it takes a lot of work to get to that point, right? Like, because your data has to be clean. It has to be cataloged effectively. It has to be named effectively. Like, if I call it the Barney Rubble drill one day and the Fred Flintstone drill the other day, the computer can't find those two drills and meld them together. So just how you name and come up with a nomenclature around stuff is critical to how stuff gets computed and put out on the other side. So there's the healthiness, the cleanliness, and then when you get into an organization, when you have multiple practitioners, now you have to get that level of data. Everyone has to commit to a responsibility of collecting their data effectively for the greater good of the organization. So if I collect my data and you don't collect your data, and we're working with the same athletes, the system breaks, right? And so there's a lot of administrative pieces that need to go together to make this work well. But it is the way of the future. It's the way it's going. And the people that jump on board with this, and it's tough. It's not easy, but the people that jump on board and are willing to go over those obstacles and solve that, those work bits, will have a significant advantage moving forward. they'll just be able to adjust to the market demands of the sport, of what the needs and demands are so much quicker because of the amount of information that's coming in that we need to process and be able to turn around and make decisions from.
What specifically do you think gives for those that are interested in the data optimization, data integration, two phrases that we still need to define. So before I ask my question, let's just define those two briefly. What's the difference between data integration and data optimization?
So data integration is integrating various different data streams, right? So I can collect through a phone, a form, I can collect through a kiosk where I come into a facility and type in some information, or a practitioner's doing an evaluation, they're putting it in on their kiosk and it's dumping in. I can put information through an API, which is, and as you're learning, not all APIs are equal. And so basically it connects to a greater cloud system. So you don't have to do any transfer of data. It's going from, say a Force platform product, and it goes right into your intelligence platform without you doing anything besides the initial setup. And so as you're using that piece of kit to test, that information pipes into your system so you can look at it on a grander scale. So that's more data integration, integrating all these different data sources into one holistic platform that you can start to really get a complete picture of what's happening in a particular situation.
And how about data optimization?
So data optimization is kind of the curating and cleaning and organizing of all that information to then be able to display it or analyze it, or do analytics and research with it to help answer questions that you may have that you're trying to answer.
So then with understanding what the AMS and intelligence platforms are doing with data integration and data optimization, there's an expression you just used a few minutes ago of the folks that adopt this early and adopt this now will have an advantage. What is that advantage and why is that important?
Yeah, because it's basically, we talked about this earlier, like how do you take day-to-day systems and turn them into ones and zeros and workflows, right? Because you have to adapt your workflow, like you're seeing maybe patients every 30 minutes. And so if this data is not easy to capture, easy to curtail, then it takes away from the actual fact of training that athlete or rehabbing that person, which is what you don't want. It should be facilitating your job, not taking away from the primary task at hand. And so you have to go through and say, okay, where am I going to put a kiosk? How am I going to think through my process that the data is just collected in situ, and it's not like, okay, now I've collected this information, now I got to sit down at a computer for 2 hours to process it all to come up with a scenario. It's all, it's you get it as you go, and then you get back to that information and it's there. And like a great example, one of our coaches who's also got a private practice, who we've talked about, Steve Fell, when you come into his clinic, he's got his kiosk, he's evaluating the people, taking them through everything. And basically, once the last, piece of kit is measured, whether it's output sports or a force plate thing or doing his SFMA stuff, he's basically walks across to a screen that's all on the TV that says, okay, this is you, this is your problems, this is your complaints, this is all the bits that I'm seeing, and these are the goals. We're trying to take these numbers and move them to these numbers to reduce the ultimate goal of pain and improving function and performance. And that all happens in his process. He doesn't have to then sit down and process all this information. And, so the same 45-minute appointment now just has a ton more value for what that person is doing and seeing, and they become extremely invested in what they need to do to change those numbers from not so good numbers to much better numbers that will ultimately result in whatever goal it is of reducing pain or improving performance.
It's perfect, man. I appreciate you giving the color to a lot of the terminology. And I mean, I learned a few things around the terminology, like the differences of what they are and what they do. And I think it's important we talk about it because everybody, like, I don't want to say everybody, that's a strong word to include the entire population. A lot of people in the majority are leaning into the data and leaning into the technology because we're learning that it can be powerful and supportive. But like we also talked about, are you spending more of your time and energy into the data, not with the human in front of you, you're probably going to lose the person in front of you, whether that's an athlete, a client, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So what
And
I'm
I was just going to say, like, this little phone has kind of wrecked it for us, right? Because we just touch our finger on it and magical things happen. Like Apple or Google or whatever phone supplier, like they have tens of thousands of people working and engineering this thing to do it and keep it simple for you. Where in the sports tech world, it pales in comparison. Like I would say, Kitman, we have over 100 plus engineers, which is huge for our space to be building on the platform and getting it moving and going in that direction. But we're going to be behind a development of something like the iPhone because it's just a manpower issue. Like we know what we're building, how we want it built, and where we're going. It's like a building; it just needs time to get built. And so I love the path we're on, the direction we're going. It's just going to take some time to get there, and but we're having success along the way, from the various organizations that we're working with, like the NWSL, the NFL, the UFL, the EPL, which is a soccer, the English Soccer League, Premier League. So it's like there's a ton of great things happening, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because I definitely wanted to highlight the work that Kitman's doing with all the partnerships they have across the leagues, across the world. So let's just double click on and just let's give a shout out to all the good work and partnership that y'all have. So can you run it back and say what are all the major partnerships y'all are working with right now?
Yeah, so NFL, the NWSL, which I'm super fired up because it's the first time, from a women's pro league that we're able to cross all teams. We are their electronic medical recording system. And so, I'm super fired up on what they're going to be able to learn in the next years, from everyone committing to this project. The English Premier League, across 92 academies there. The UFL was just announced today or day before. And then, tons of teams across multiple sports and organizations around the world. So that's just to name a few. So it's things are going well, and we can always make them better, and we will. And yeah, looking forward to the journey. That's what it's about.
It's definitely been a journey because I distinctly remember, and I don't know why I remember this so strongly, but I remember grabbing a lunch at Dave Tenney's Sounders conference back in like 2011, 2012 maybe, and it was with Steve. And the
Steven
CEO,
Smith? Yeah.
he's pitching me on. I think they were just bringing on the Xbox Connect, right? The product that they were from a movement side, and to see where the company's gone from, let's just call it 2012 to now 2024. When you say journey, like that describes it so well, because the coolest thing that y'all have done is you just adapted to what the needs are of all the sports partnerships that you have, and like that's what excites me about partnering with y'all as well, is because where I'm trying to get to in practice and high performance, I know you guys are the right people to be with because of everything that we've already talked about and then some.
Yeah, appreciate that. And like the only way to get your experience is get your hands dirty, and we've definitely gotten our hands dirty, right? Like we've come from that level. Like I've grown through what data was from Excel sheets, basic Excel sheets before there were pivot tables and Power Pivot, right? All the way through to R and Python and all the Gucci coding stuff that's out there today. And everything in between. And there's a ton of learning, even from like migrating groups from their old systems into, when we take them on board, when, we have to migrate a whole league over, you see, it's kind of like hotels. You see the back of house and you see what's clean and what's not clean. And it tells you a lot about the hotel. And just that experience of what it takes to get that stuff organized and in line, and decisions you make today, how it's going to have a knock-on ramification in the future is massive. And unless you've walked that walk, it's hard to know.
I agree with that, because earlier in the conversation you were talking about when it just came to even inputting data, in the sense of, if you call this drill this thing and this drill something else. I think you use a Flintstones reference analogy, there. Yeah, and I remember struggling with that so hard early on when working with the Adidas My Coach system. Is like if you by accident say your spelling wasn't great and you put an extra L or an extra dot or
Or
extra
you
space.
capitalize something in lowercase.
Oh my gosh, it was an absolute nightmare. And you have to go back and like I just did hours of data entry and I realized I inputted the drill not the same as I did 2 weeks ago. So
Yeah.
now the system and anyways, I appreciate the need to get your hands dirty just to have an appreciation for what it takes. Why is it important to get your hands dirty and grind it out and do some of the hard work to then be able to get to the stage that you're at in your career to be able to have these amazing conversations and understanding of pieces?
Yeah, I think it starts with curiosity, right? Like the why, because when you get your hands dirty, you see a lot of movement. Like, in PT school, I used to sit in the park and just watch people walk and guess what their issues were. Because you're like, oh, that guy's hip. I think that if I went and asked him, it was, he's probably had a total hip or has something with a knee and you got to see a lot of repetitions, right? Like just like an athlete, you got to shoot a lot of baskets to finally sink them when you need them. And it's critical. And then the curiosity of like, hey, I applied this treatment. I thought this was the same thing, same diagnosis. So I applied the same treatment, but the results aren't the same. So why is that? Like you're constantly asking why, because it's all these mini experiments of, you should have a hypothesis based on what you just evaluated. You should have an expectation of what they can't do, all these things. And then, you just start going through your checklists and you're like, okay, yep, they could do that. They could do that. They could, and they can't do this. Like, that's weird. How come? Like, I thought they would be able to do it based on the fact that they couldn't. And then you gotta go look again, like, what did I miss? Is there something in there that's I'm missing? And then that, you're like, okay, caught that, put that in my little personal knowledge management system. So the next time it comes around, I'm adding it to the checklist to make sure that, did I hit that the next time around? And so learning by doing is I think, you remember, and it builds a vast load of experience. And if you don't go through those processes, it's tough. Like even the transition when I started seeing people less, like moving from therapy to doing more performance-based stuff, I struggled because in therapy, I could have my hands on them and you feel the tissue, the end quality, all those little things that gave you information on how they were going to stand up and demonstrate their movement capacity. And then when you don't have that and you just have to say, hey, Adam, how did they move? What did you feel? You explain it versus what you saw it. And like, I'm like, okay, I trust that he hit all the bits and, I'm going to be off to the races, on the handoff. And until you spend time with each other, going through all those mental models and ladders of inference of getting from A to Z, you can miss a lot of the nuancy detail that's really important.
And I think that highlights what you referenced earlier as far as when it comes to the data integration aspect of it is everybody being on board to do that, because exactly what you just said, right? Like you could easily be a one-stop shop, Darce, right? Like take someone from the table to the weight room, to the field, have the conversation with the coach. Like you could do it all. But inevitably that's not scalable, and that's very challenging to do across, let's just call it 24 athletes. I'm not quite sure what the international roster is, but that's not feasible. So I think that's what's important and exciting about the data integration aspect of it. As long as everybody's on board and committed to that process, the word that I know you speaks to your soul, process, and systems, then that can potentially alleviate the discourse that may happen of like, okay, I don't have all the information, I didn't put my hands on them, but I can go into our system and see what we have because I trust our process of data integration and data input is clean and consistent.
Yeah, exactly. I always use the analogy of like soccer, right? Like you have 11 guys or gals on the pitch, and the goal is to put the ball in the back of the net, right? Like sometimes the defender has to be a forward, sometimes the forward has to defend, the midfielder's in there, the goalie's doing his thing, primary responsibilities, but the late game for getting a goal is up in the box trying to get the header, right? Like it's all in the effort to put the ball in the net. And people have their primary roles and responsibilities, but as a team, as a unit, you got to get it in there. And and it's a dynamic process, and it takes time to get 11 people moving dynamically in the right direction. It takes effort and cooperation from everybody on that team. So you got to have a clear kind of mission, vision, the values that you're filtering your decisions from, all trying to move everybody, in the same direction.
When you talk about decision making and getting people to move in the right direction, and a lot of our conversation so far has been heavy on the tech and the data and exploring what that world is because you're living it currently and have done a great job in your career incorporating it. One thing I think always helps people and audience providing context. And I remember a story from years ago of how you explicitly told me how data influence a big time decision while you guys were preparing for the World Cup relative to some particular players based on some numbers you were seeing. And so I'm not alluding to that particular case study, but I'm curious to see if you could provide some context for us as far as in your career, can you share a specific instance where data influenced a coaching decision?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like I would say it influences it almost on a daily basis, right? Like as we're preparing for Copa America, coming up, you're taking in all the minutes that guys have played over a season, over the last quarter, over the last month, as they're rolling into camp, to be able to plan effectively a training session that benefits all these guys that all have different loads in their system. And so, and to keep it simple, right? Like you got the guys that have done a ton and probably need more recovery. You got the guys that are kind of in the middle. And then you got the guys that haven't done a lot or had a lot of playing minutes that need top ups and need extra things. And so how do you coordinate all these bits to make sure that it's all working? And so like a great example, our sports scientist, Jordan Webb, who phenomenal guy and self-taught in the data, like he's on another planet. He's built us some amazing tools. One is this drill builder, and another tool is this training load tolerance tool. So the drill builder has all our historical data that we've collected of every drill on every player in the last 5 years. And I have already planned out our camp from now till the end of Copa, if we were to win it, what the loading will be for the whole camp. And if we were to go the whole way, and in the worst case scenario, so like what's the worst case? Then we talk to the clubs and we say, hey, can you provide us your data from the last 4 weeks or whatever time frame? They send it to us. We can put it, and it goes into our training load tolerance tool, and we can compare all the numbers to what they've been doing to what we need them to do. And then just using the first principles of strength and conditioning and overload and recovery, how far off is that? And then on certain loading days that we know, like, okay, this is going to be a hard day. So how can we turn the screws on this to make it as hard as possible without falling off the cliff? Like I always say, the Grand Canyon, you want to get as close to the edge to enjoy the best view possible, but not get so close that you end up falling off and dying in the canyon, right? And so that's what a technology affords you, is we can dial in exactly the load, the amount, the volume of what somebody needs to get them there, to reduce the risk of, reduce the risk of any injuries while still improving the level of performance. So yeah, I can give you, day after day examples of that stuff, but that's a big one and a critical one. Like I told Jordan the other day that the way that we're working now, I almost can't work without these tools anymore because of like what we're able to do with them and the information it gives us and the level of detail we can program to elevate guys' performance without, running the risk that they're going to get injured. Or reducing, I should say. You never
sounds like a dream. Sounds like a dream. It sounds like a dream world you're living in over there.
I know, totally. To your point, also, like it takes a group, right? Like it's not just me and Jordan. It takes the coach to be like, hey guys, we're going to plan, and it's going to have structure, and we're going to follow that structure. It takes all the coaches to same thing. Like it's not 2 key people and you can do all this stuff. Like it has to have an organizational structure and pathway for this to work, because all it takes is for a coach to go off script and be like, you know what, these guys are training like shit today. We're going to sit out here for 20 more minutes until they can get this done. Be like, okay, great, we could do that, but there's going to be a consequence to that decision. And then you have to, make your next decision based on the consequence of that training session. So the more you can dial things in and be really good planners, the less you have to deal with these kind of massive consequential outlier decisions that can, put you in a bad spot.
It takes a village, doesn't it?
Definitely takes a village. Yes.
And I do know the integration and collaboration y'all have there within your group is high, very high in comparison to a lot of teams and practitioners that don't get to experience what you do. So I think it's important to highlight like the work that you have done and Jordan has done hasn't just happened overnight. Certainly hasn't even happened over 2 years. I mean, we're talking a minimum, I would imagine 5 years to get to where you guys have at, because it just takes time to build up the database, takes time to build up an understanding of coaches' tendencies, players' tendencies, all those things. Like that's why the data collection process, not to go back to the tech side of things, but that's why the data collection process from the jump, from early on, has to be set to understand, okay, we may not have the results in the next 6 months, but with the stuff that you guys are doing now to prepare yourselves for 2026 World Cup, gosh, like that just seems so powerful for the ability to prepare and improve performance at such a like dialed in method and way of doing it that it almost seems like that you're set to have success in that space, or at least have the availability of your athletes to be at a high performance space.
Yeah. I mean, when you're hosting the World Cup with the group that we have, you want to give yourself the best opportunity to show what these guys can do with no rock left unturned. Right. So that's what we're trying to do. And by no means, the way we're doing it isn't going to guarantee getting one of those little buggers, but we want to give us the best chance possible. Right. Because if we did it, it would be freaking amazing. Like I saw what it meant to a country of Germany, and to be there at the Brandenburg Gates to celebrate with a country. It was like nothing you could ever imagine. For the US to be able to experience that would be phenomenal.
And I would be on the other side. I'd be in that crowd while you're up on stage holding it. So I'd be right there with you. Just
I'll take it. I'll take it. If you can set that up, I'll take it.
Gladly would.
Exactly.
Darce, as expected, we didn't even touch on 10% of the questions that we have written down, which is always the best part about conversation with folks like you. So I want to be mindful of your time, but I also want to always hit home on 2 questions I love asking guests, especially someone with your pedigree and experience and knowledge and curiosity. And kind of the 2 questions I want to ask is, the first one is just talking about like leaning into optimism and finding our small wins, but then also providing advice in this inundated world of tech and data when it comes to managing our own health and performance. So the first question I want to ask you is, we've been talking about this grandiose idea of the big win of winning the World Cup, but we know it's only 2024. We're trying to get to 2026. So how are you personally or collaborating with your team finding the small wins along the way to help you maintain high performance every day?
Yeah, it's definitely a journey. You got your peaks and valleys, and it's about learning in the valleys, celebrating in the peaks, but knowing, like we have this little mantra: for every mountain, there's another mountain, right? Like there's just it's just a grind that you got to keep going on. And so it's about, the vision, the mission of what you're trying to do, the values, the shared values of the group you get to work with every day that kind of brings the energy of everything. And, I always say, like, if you're not happy where you're at, you got to look at the values of the people you're hanging out with and get with people that share your values. Because usually when people don't work out in a space, it's because their values aren't aligned. And it's not that, one person's a bad person and another person's the good person. It's just the values aren't the same. And so it's not going to work. And you just got to move on from that. So yeah, I think aligning yourself with like-minded people, towards a common goal, and then very process based. We have this kind of plan, do, review process where I think everybody does the plan and then they go try and execute it, but they don't take the time to sit down and review what worked, what didn't work. And so, we were like, I review every day. Did I get, I set an intention to the day. And then at the end of the day, I was like, did I get my stuff accomplished or not? How come? Did I set myself up for failure? Did I not pay attention? Did I not get enough sleep last night? Whatever the case may be. And it's just this constant review. When we go into camp, we finish camp, what worked, what didn't work, how do we make it better and move forward? And so you're just constantly iterating and then having a really good process that you can rely on. Because I always say, if you know what straight is, then you know what straight isn't. And, just like a map, if you kind of have a general direction of where you want to go, you can always get off the map and go check out some rabbit hole somewhere, but you know how to get back online to keep going in the direction you want. So those are a few little things I try and live by. And I don't want to sit here and say that I run a perfect world by any means, because I definitely, there's days where I wish I would have accomplished a lot more or got more done or whatever, but at least you just keep working away and trying to get better every day.
The example that came into mind when you talked about plan, do, review, I love that expression, is when you're working in the team sports setting. Mm-hmm. No one's ever asking the questions, why are we winning? They're always asking the questions, why are we losing? And it's crazy. And I've lived that so many times, whether it was an MLS and we were on a 9-game losing streak, which is a hell of a long time in MLS season, or you're in the NBA and you're on a 11-game losing streak, or you've won 10 of 11. And it's like, but the moment you're winning 16 in a row, 15 in a row, it's, what do we, the questions are so different because the emotions are so different. And I just wanted to share that perspective because it's so, I don't want to say funny. It's just just to acknowledge the fact that the plan, do, review should be regardless of the results at the end of the process.
100%. Like it's the winning is the outcome, right? But you need to know how you got to that outcome. And there's at the national team, we say, you plan, you perform, you reflect, you refine. Plan, do, review. You have the OODA loop, right? Like observe, orient, decide, express, capture, distill, express. Like there's all these different ways, but the big thing is, kind of like recovery. And recovery is when you reflect. And that's going to, kind of build you up so you can get your work done. Like Exos had the work plus rest equals success, right? Like you need that rest, recovery, reflection. That's a key piece in the process. And yeah, as you know, it's like soccer, you could do everything right and lose, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so it's important that you have these processes in place that, did I win the day? And if I can string enough winning days together, then I'm going to have some winning games and so forth. So that piece is key. There was one other point that popped into my head that I think is important also, came and went. But yeah, the winning side of it is, like there's a lot of things that go into winning, and winning hides a lot of the junk, right? Because everyone's happy that you're winning, but you still could have a ton of underlying issues, and all it takes is a couple losses for those to get exposed, and then you're back in the gutter again. So it's important to have that process. So win or lose, you're in a good spot. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is when people, you always see this, a guy comes to a new team or a gal and they say, hey, what are your goals? We want to win trophies. Okay, great. Guess what? Only one team wins a trophy. And in a league where you have 20 or 30 teams, what happens when you're middle of the table? Then what? Like, what's your motivation then? Because there's no chance you're going to win this trophy because you're too far gone in the points to get there. And so you got to have other pieces to kind of keep that going, because only, in real athletics, only one person wins. Not everybody gets a medal at the end of the day.
I think that's a little dig there at the younger participation trophies, and I support that 1,000%. And there was one, I'm not gonna lie, there was one moment during By the way, let's just hit pause. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing all that. There was a lot of good advice that came with there. But at
Appreciate
one
that.
point, because you're on this plan, do, review, you're dropping all these acronyms, and then you said win or lose, and I thought you were going to come back and say win or lose, we still booze. I was like, Ars, we own that.
Yeah, no, that day is gone. It's because there's so many games you don't have time. Like you win, and then guess what? The league starts again tomorrow, so there's just no time.
After the World Cup win, there will be time for
Yeah,
that.
there'll be a little bit. Yeah, if it all goes, yeah, that will hopefully the party will be great.
I think you answered this question, but I just wanted to ask it directly to see if there's anything specifically you wanted to share. And that, like, yeah, like last question of discussing small wins and having sustained success, you provided a lot of practical advice. But when it comes to this age of we're trying to manage our own health and performance, and we're trying to integrate the next best thing, and we're trying to just live better and be better at what we do, or make a small upgrade, like you said earlier, not change, but make a small upgrade. What advice do you have for people?
Yeah, it was funny. I just went to this SOS executive leadership course that they were hosting, and it was awesome. And we talk about like setting goals and then going to achieve them, right? And then you have this plan, do, review process. And one of the things that hit me like a ton of bricks was these micro intentions. And my wife does this really well. Like she gets up, she sits at the table and she writes down her list of things of how she wants her day to go. And then, she goes about getting them done. And then this Exos conference, it was about even micro goals. So like I got 50 minutes. How do I want this 50 minutes to go? What do I want to achieve in this 50 minutes? And then I'm going to set the attention for that 15 minutes. And by setting a clear goal, it helps you get into flow. So whether it's like sporting flow, work flow, where time just goes by. And so I've even gotten to the point in upgrading my systems of these micro intentions. So it's like, I got 30 minutes before my next meeting. What do I want to get accomplished? I set a little intention. I got to get through 10 emails. Okay, boom, here's where I'm going. And did I do it? Did I not? And kind of going from there. So that's what I'm trying to put into practice these days. And I think taking those little intentional bits, you start to realize, what's too much in a day, what's not enough in a day. And like any kind of plan, do, review system, you get better at planning and you get better at doing and you get better at reviewing, which just goes back to, you got to get your hands dirty.
Yeah. And there it is. It ties it all together. That was fantastic. I would be remiss not to ask this last question because of the places you've been in the world and the success that you have had, because I think it's just, people are always interested in this kind of stuff. And I think it's just cool that you've been a part of some of it too. So what is one of your most, and no names needed, one of your most memorable or enjoyable locker room moments or stories?
Man. Oof, that's tough. Yeah, I definitely being in the locker room after winning a World Cup, right, where you saw grown men drop to their knees in tears after and the guys that weren't even playing, not even the players, but like people in the stands, and what those moments, like it didn't really it took me a while to process that. And then the magnitude from the people that came into the locker room, the people that were at the party, just what an amazing sporting event can do to bring a group of people, a country, a culture together is an amazing thing to be a part of. And I would say on the flip side of that, I've told this story before, in just the humility factor is, winning the World Cup, amazing. You feel like a rock star, everything, you're on cloud nine. Everyone's like, amazing, you're amazing. And then I came back to Tahoe and, first day back, I'm going to just take it easy, roll into the coffee shop, get me a coffee, enjoy the day, nice sunny Tahoe, bluebird day. And this guy I hadn't seen in a while comes in and he's like, hey, Darce, I haven't seen you for a while. What have you been up to? And I was like, yeah, just working, man, just working. And it made me realize like stuff is only important to the people it's important to. And so it really does come down to just like what's your passion and sticking with it. And the people that value it will value it, and the people that don't, like, it's not a big deal. You know, you just, as long as you got it going on. So it's yeah, I would say that's the one of the, leave you with a heavy moment there, but that was that's probably one of the biggest life lessons I've taken from all this.
And it's a great life lesson to walk away with too, because yeah, that just sounds amazing. It sounds you can feel it, you can hear it in your voice. Like, okay, that was a special moment. And also, I think the flip side of that too, just a brief anecdote you had at the coffee shop in Tahoe. I think that summarizes kind of how we all probably experience our successes and our wins and the big moments, and recognize that's important to me, but it may not be important to the person next to me. But I think
Yeah.
it's important to celebrate those along the way.
Totally. Yeah, it's big. And I mean, probably the other thing is just seeing other guys achieve, and people that you get to work with achieve their goals. Like, you know this, people that have suffered from a long-term injury that, have really worked and put every blood, sweat, and tears into something, and then reach a goal that they never thought would be possible after that. Like, that's amazing to be a part of, and to help somebody on that journey achieve something is super cool.
Yes. And I think that's why we're all probably in this space of trying to help each other out and be a part of those moments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, hey, Darce, we're gonna catch up again soon. Hopefully, you guys come out here. What, you got quarterfinals? I think maybe potentially with
If we're second in our group, we'll be in Phoenix. First in our group, we'll be in Vegas. So as much as I'd love to come to Phoenix and say hi and have a coffee, I'd prefer to end up in Vegas for group one. So maybe we can meet in the middle.
Well, for your sake, I do hope it's Vegas and not Phoenix. But hey, in the off chance, I look forward to seeing you soon. And if not, we'll certainly be catching up. Is there any place that people can connect with you if they want to ask more or learn more? Or is it kind of, hey, come check out Darce on the stage after they win the World Cup?
Right. Yeah, totally. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter. I follow a lot of people. I don't post a ton. I'm on Instagram. I'm still figuring out how that works. So yeah, when you come to data and technology, there's certain things I'm putting priorities into. That's not one of them.
It's amazing how integrated you are with technology, and the fact that social media is still a foreign topic to you. I love it.
That's a whole
the
other
irony
thing.
of it.
What you could do with social media, like I'm probably more trolling people than anything, but what you can get from social media is amazing. So yeah, and then just email dnorman@ussoccer.org or darcy@kitmanlabs.com. If anyone's got any questions, I like to think I respond to anybody and everybody. So just give me some grace in replying as things are getting busy, and it might take me some days or a week to get back, but I typically will get back to people.
We will certainly add that. And Darce, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing the stories. Thank you for just being you.